Thank you so much, Ori, for this very generous introduction, and thank you for inviting me. And thanks, Tom, and for the center for doing all the logistics, etc. And thank you all for coming out on a Friday afternoon. 4:30 or so to listen and see this talk. So the specific title for this presentation is actually Working in the Streets, Silencing Cairo's Street Hawkers. And this paper is taken from my book, Street Sounds, Listening to Everyday Life in Modern Egypt. But before I delve into the paper, I'd like to briefly give you an overview of the book so you can get a sense of where this presentation sort of spots in and fits in into the larger project. So in the book, I examine everyday life in Egypt using sound and the politics of sound as one of the key tools for uncovering the changes that went on in the Egyptian streets during the first half of the 20th century. By listening into these street changes, we can get a lot closer to the embodied realities of everyday life. This, they argue, allows for a more micro-historical examination of everyday life. Also, it allows us to not examine everyday people's interactions with each other, and in many ways helps us to evaluate the impact of the various street-level technological and infrastructural changes taking place at the turn of the 20th century and beyond. That's the title of the talk. Historians have recently started listening to the past, contributing to what David Hose described as, and I quote, a sensorial revolution in humanities and social sciences. In the same way that all five senses are relevant to our daily understanding of the world around us, they are also vital to our understanding of historical events. Examining the changing soundscapes of the past and interpreting how people sonically experience their world makes possible a richer, more comprehensive, micro-level grasp of everyday life. So by listening in to the sources, historians can get a little closer to the mundane realities taking place in the streets, revealing a great deal about how ordinary people dealt with modernity and encroaching state authority. This embodied micro-historical approach can also uncover everyday men and women's daily struggles to make a living through their use and misuse of the public streets. There's much to be discovered by incorporating sounds and soundscapes into our methodological toolkit. But before we continue our discussion, we must address some common misconceptions about the nature of sound and its suitability for historical study. For contemporary events, or for many historical events that occurred in the second half of the 20th century, sound and audiovisual recordings, of course, are available for examination. But how can researchers fill in this sensory gap when writing about historical periods before the invention of recording? The obvious solution to this problem can be found in the same text that historians have been using all along, or as R. Murray Schafer has eloquently stated, historians, and I'm quoting, will have to turn to ear-witness accounts. The fact that historians silently read texts in the archives does not mean that the original writers were only depicting first visual observations. These require content, meaning, and information from their physical environment, using all five senses, of course. Lest we forget, the very act of writing is as much tactile as it is visual, and the information being conveyed will no doubt be full of embodied multisensory content. By attuning ourselves to the sounds described within the text, we can perceive the perspective that the original authors have conveyed regarding the sounds, noises, and words that they may have heard. Also, writers don't just record what they have seen and heard, depending on the events that they're covering and the context of the documents they were writing. They can also detail olfactory, tactile, and gustatory information. So each historical time and locale has their very natural, animal, human, and technological sounds that play an important role in defining the place to its inhabitants. These sounds have an assortment of economic, environmental, social, and cultural implications which are vital to a well-rounded understanding of the past. In Egypt, as many of you are aware, and elsewhere around the Mediterranean as well, coffee shops were and continue to be an extension of the street, in that their spatial and sonic boundaries usually expanded beyond their officially closed space. Weather permitting, most Egyptian cafes sat more people outside on the sidewalks than inside, with obvious sonic implications for the neighborhood that surrounds them. This meant that passers-by, be they paperboys, street vendors, entertainers, or simply pedestrians, could observe and listen to, if not participate in, the coffee shop experience, as you can obviously see from this picture. As newer and louder technologies such as gramophones and radios were introduced, the acoustic imprints of cafes must have dramatically increased. Commercial activity was and still is loudly conducted on the sidewalks of these cafes, as dozens of street hawkers took advantage of the already seated clientele. Street hawkers did not just sell their goods near the market or to coffee shop customers. As new institutions like theaters, cinemas, trains, and prom stations were introduced, vendors followed with their wares and loud calls. Tramways themselves often served as ready-made moving platforms for hawkers to make a sale. Electric tramways were not just vehicles for transporting people, they also created their own embodied social and economic space, allowing for direct and indirect sociability and economic interaction across gender, culture, and class lines. So tramways were not these hermetically sealed capsules, and sensory perception and engagement with the street was ongoing for all passengers, especially those sitting or standing, of course, near the open doors and windows. In fact, as you can see from these photographs, most Cairene trams, save for a metal side rail, were entirely open to the streets. Not only were the cheapest tramway tickets affordable, but by avoiding the conductor altogether, many could easily use the tram without paying a penny. This was frequently done by children, students, and street merchants who could easily climb in and out or simply hang onto the outside of the tram. In fact, the line between pedestrian and tram rider was not always clear, as it was easy for both paying and non-paying passengers to go in and out of the tram when it stopped in traffic or when it was moving very slowly, which it frequently does, of course, in the streets of Cairo. Not anymore, but we still have tramways in Alexandria. Multilingual signs in Arabic, English, French, and Greek were posted on the trams, forbidding passengers from riding on the tram's footboard. These signs, of course, were rarely obeyed in practice, as footboards were always in use by passengers when the tram was overcrowded, and what I call sort of tram surfers who latched onto the outside to avoid the fare. Newspaper boys, shoeblacks, and trinket sellers also relied on the footboard for jumping on and off the moving tram at will. So this sort of tram surfing was very common in Egypt, as this 1918 account confirms. And I'm quoting, "If the regulations about riding on footboards were enforced, the hawkers of meats, drinks, and knickknacks would not plague you with their constant solicitations. The boot boys carry on their trade furtively between the seats. Often they ride for a mile, working hard on a half a dozen boots." The police, of course, attempted to limit tram surfing, and in 1921, just in the Abdin district of Cairo, 731 citations were given for illegal tram riding. However, by all accounts, this was just a drop in the bucket and did little to discourage this practice. For example, an American couple living in Egypt in 1955 remarked, quoting, "We were able to spend many enjoyable hours exploring the city. These journeys were usually made by tram. The most exciting experience, as the majority of Cairo trams are open at either side and travel so slowly that peddlers can come and go at will, even when the tram is in motion." So public transportation, and trams in particular, provided a moving platform for riders to talk, buy, sell, and engage in a variety of social and economic interactions. As a physically moving space that outsiders can enter and exit with ease, tramways are neither, of course, private nor entirely public. So in many ways, tram surfing illustrates this relative liminality of the tram as a new modern space, which on a daily basis allowed for embodied and loud interactions. Moreover, the use and misuse of the tram by paying and non-paying passengers, street hawkers, and even pickpockets indicates that trams were, for the most part, almost entirely appropriated by the urban residents for their own use, going well beyond their intended use as basic transportation. Go to the slides and certainly illustrate the tram surfing. And as you can see from these photographs, street hawkers had regular routes in most urban neighborhoods. The loudness and pitch of their calls were essential to reaching inside the homes of the customers. It was more than just the actual words being sounded. It was the unique inflection, tone, and pitch of a particular seller's voice that signals from a distance the exact product being sold. The astute listener could then approximate the distance and time of the hawker's arrival, giving them time to walk down the stairs and, of course, conduct the transaction. For smaller items, the customers didn't need to descend the streets. Most households had handy wicker baskets attached to long ropes, which they could send down cash and bring up the purchased goods. In these scenarios, both the buyers, who were predominantly women, and the sellers shouted the details of the transaction for all to hear. Building walls may visually create a partition, separating private from public. But at the time, especially the early parts of the 20th century and late 19th century, most walls would partly stop sound from traveling through. Windows, balconies, and doors enhanced the sonic penetration and served as sensory portals, connecting residents with their neighbors and their neighborhood. There was little sound insulation in walls in the late 19th to mid 20th century houses, and residences in poorer districts didn't have glass windows to even slightly buffer against street sounds. Road noises and even loud conversations were easily heard inside houses and apartments. In most cases, this was not necessarily undesirable, as connecting with your neighbors and interacting with street hawkers was not only convenient, but the expected norm. So windows, balconies, and rooftops had the potential to become liminal zones that were neither private nor public, especially when they were actively used as platforms for social and economic engagement. The presence of hawkers in the streets in significant numbers created regular spheres of physical interaction and conversation with pedestrians, other vendors, store owners, and even residents who had their windows and doors open. The more one listens to these interactions, the more it becomes apparent that, again, the public versus private sphere split was neither as rigid as theorized. For instance, Mary Whately, a longtime resident of late 19th century Cairo, wrote that she often heard through her windows her neighbors talking to each other and to street merchants. According to Whately, her neighbor regularly sat on her reed mat selling sugar canes in the street corner, right next to her window, and I'm quoting, talked incessantly to anyone who came within earshot, whether customer or not. Whately also vividly described how in the late afternoons, when the street merchants were closing up their accounts, she would regularly hear a few sharp bargainers, quoting again, trying to get oranges, beans, etc., at a lower rate than before. The clatter of tongues was quite astonishing. So windows, doors, rooftops, and balconies more directly focused the auditory, and sometimes visual interactions between those who are partly on the inside and yet still engaged in varying degrees with their neighbors or street hawkers on the outside, providing places of direct sensory interaction that were neither entirely public nor private. In Egypt, significant number of the street hawkers were women. In fact, Many late 19th and early 20th century observers have noted somewhat of a gender division of labor among the male and female street hawkers. Whately, again, who in the 1860s and 70s lived in the Kairim district of Bedouin, remarked that Egyptian women typically sold milk, clotted cream, yogurt, oranges, radishes, grilled corn, sugarcane, and other fresh produce. In 1902, Hamad Alma corroborates and expands on Whately's assessment by stating that men specialize in selling, and I quote, matches, books, shoes, sweets, clothing, statues, boterga, which is fakara, for those of you that know Egyptian Arabic, textiles, cheese, breadsticks, newspapers, peanuts, oil, whistles, bracelets, pottery, and everything for a penny, or everything they should say. Women, according to Alma, sold, and I quote, flowers, textiles, rosewater, dates, milk, honey, ghee, oranges, dates, and corn. However, this observed division of labor between male and female street merchants was not really hard and fast, as I found plenty of evidence of women selling jewelry and cheese, for example. In any case, there's no evidence of any official or social mechanism that specifically forbade female vendors from selling a particular product. So up to the first half of the 20th century, the number and variety of calls from street merchants dwarfed what they are today. And they're still quite prevalent today in most parts of Cairo, Alexandria, and elsewhere in Egypt. A contemporary observer in mid-1930s, Cairo, for example, documented 165 distinct calls by street hawkers that were just, these were just for food sellers. The merchants loudly and often melodically emphasized the freshness, ripeness, taste, size, or geographic origins of the food that they were selling. Comparisons, often quite amusing or exaggerated, were sometimes used to drive the point home for the buyer. Tomatoes, for example, could be the size of pomegranates or as red as roses. Because Egyptians still do prefer small cucumbers, they were often likened to kidney beans. Some declared that their dates were as good as lamb. The statue sellers compared their products to grilled quail, and sellers of barbecue corn announced that their corn was as tasty as roasted chicken. If the tenderness of the food was important, sorry for the vegans out there, almost everything, the meat was more expensive. If the tenderness of the food was important, then the sellers loudly chanted, and I quote, even the toothless can eat them. Upon seeing a child playing in the streets, candy vendors would yell out, Ayakom Makiawed, or cry to your mother, little boy, urging young children to beg their mothers for candy. There were also dozens of non-vocal auditory cues used by vendors selling candy and other sweets to children. Writing about his childhood during the late 1910s in Cairo's State of Zainab district, Fahmy vividly remembers many of these distinct calls and sounds. He recalls how the sellers of the traditional caramel had the long pieces of the toffee-like candy attached to a long pole with a rattle at the end of it. According to Radwan, when the vendor shook the pole, it produced a loud, irresistible rattling sound that drove all the neighboring children crazy as they came out of the woodwork with their pennies in hand. This is from an Egyptian village, this picture in 1914, but it's a similar product was being sold that way all over Cairo. You see the rattle on the top, and it's the caramel around the stick right there. Radwan also recalls a vendor selling vanilla wafers who employed a variety of sonic tools to advertise his arrival. He not only blew a small horn, but made a loud cracking sound by beating two pieces of wood against each other. And for good measure, he sometimes shouted, Bescote vanilla, or vanilla cookies, for all to hear. Butane tank merchants, who are still heard throughout Egypt, would signal their arrival to an entire neighborhood without uttering a single word. Striking their metal butane cylinders with a wrench, they produce a familiar, loud, and rhythmic clanking that sonically carried for several city blocks. Lemonade, sherbet, and licorice juice sellers rhythmically clanked their large castanet-like brass saucers to advertise their cold drinks. Perhaps the earliest sounded film, and ahead of time, the sound is not working very well. I think you have to be very quiet and trying to listen to my laptop. But perhaps the earliest sounded film recording of one of these drink sellers was captured in the winter of 1928 in the raw footage of a newsreel by the Fox movie film company. And the licorice juice seller, surrounded by a mass of people in Cairo's on the same district, performed in front of the camera while clanking his brass saucers for close to 20 seconds. He loves the camera. So this video is back when I started out this project. I wasn't necessarily thinking about I'll ever find actual recordings, and I just ran into this by luck. It's in the University of South Carolina, and it has a lot of, you can really listen to even and it picks up the sounds of some of the footsteps, the cars that they go by, and I talk about it extensively in the book in another chapter. But you know, you don't really need these sources. The whole point of this is that the texts themselves are rich with sensory sources. Right? In part because of the transitory nature of street hawkers, their relationship with the Egyptian state was and still is rife with tension. Unsuccessful attempts at regulating, documenting, and taxing them began in the mid-19th century and continue to this day. These regulations attempted not only to dictate where and when these merchants could sell their wares, but also they attempt to control their hygiene, the volume of their calls, and they try to dictate what time of day that they can loudly advertise their merchandise. For example, on paper at least, street hawkers were not allowed to make their calls after sunset, and during the summer, they were forbidden to sell their goods during siesta time, from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. It's important to note that the vast majority of street hawkers were unregulated, and though these laws were on the books, they were unevenly enforced. Police abuse of street merchants was common, as dozens of petitions to the Egyptian government in the 1930s and 40s attest. Police beatings, arrests, and embezzling money from unlicensed merchants was common. When placed under arrest, the most common offense was, of course, obstructing traffic. In an October 16, 1944 petition to King Farouk, Abdel Masoud Khalaf Hassan, self-proclaimed president of the Public Union of Knick-Knack Peddlers, declares, and I quote, this is all in the petition, "The police are constantly harassing and chasing after us in the streets and alleyways as if we are criminals running from justice. The truth is that we are merely trying to make an honest living. We are without any rights, we endure daily toil and suffer backbreaking work just to barely make ends meet. The doors to other professions are closed shut for us. This is the only means for our livelihood, and it is honest work. We work in the coldest of winter nights and the hottest summer days. We sell sunglasses, pens, and knickknacks, which are all very small and light. We certainly do not cause any traffic obstructions, as is often claimed by the police." So after making his case, Hassan then proceeds to lay out 3 basic demands from the government. 1, stop chasing after and arresting street hawkers. 2, reform the current laws. 3, facilitate the procurement of street hawker license. Not surprisingly, none of these demands were met, as 3 years later, yet another petition was filed complaining of the exact same police abuses. This new petition, which was dated March 27, 1947, asked the government to recognize and license more street hawkers in order to legitimate their economic activities. These 2 petitions and many others like them suggest that the laws concerning street hawkers were only partly enforced. So even though, according to state regulations, street merchants were supposed to have licenses, few of those licenses were given out as they were difficult to obtain. These uneven and often unsuccessful attempts by the police to silence and restrict the activities of street merchants continue, of course, till this day. So street hawkers still thrive in Egyptian streets, and their voices continue to be heard. So I want to begin my conclusion by reading you a quote from Michel Desserteau's The Practice of Everyday Life. I'm quoting, "The ordinary practitioners of the city live down below the threshold at which visibility begins. They walk, an elementary form of experiencing the city. They are walkers whose bodies follow the thicks and thins of an urban text, which they write without being able to read it. These practitioners make use of spaces that cannot be seen. Their knowledge of them is as blind as that of lovers in each other's arms." Desserteau's depiction of life down below on the street level captures an embodied extra-visual sensory knowledge that ordinary urban dwellers have of their immediate environment. For the city resident, there is an innate sensory familiarity to a neighborhood street, supplementing known sights with equally familiar pleasant or unpleasant sounds, smells, and tastes. Even the touch and feel of specific dips, curves, and cracks in the streets and sidewalks become intimately and blindly familiar to pedestrians as they daily take the same route to work, school, or the market. Desserteau's insistence on the importance of walking the city is in effect urging a multi-sensory understanding of space. By literally or figuratively walking in the streets, one can move beyond the watchful gaze of the state, or beyond the two-dimensional plans and maps that were drawn out and put into place by state bureaucrats. As I hope I demonstrated in this talk, by moving closer and listening into street life, we can partly reveal how people live their everyday lives, and more importantly, clarify how they dealt with state authorities in their mundane struggles over the use and ownership of the streets. Compared to other approaches, the sensory approach is also more embodied and intimate, as it sheds more light on how ordinary people adapted to the plethora of modernizing changes taking place during the first half of the 20th century. The Egyptian streets were not only a living, breathing laboratory for rapidly unfolding infrastructural and technological changes, but also it was one of the few places where most elements of society could potentially at least interact face to face. I focus on Egyptians who made a living in the streets, from pedestrians and tram riders to merchants and street hawkers, all of whom, of course, left their sonic imprints in the archives. Walking through and using and misusing the city streets is in itself an act of appropriation, as pedestrians sensorially project their presence. People take ownership of the streets when they use them, whether they're simply walking through, sitting in an outdoor cafe, or selling their goods in the city's squares and roads. As we examine these embodied possessions of public spaces, who are not always uncontested, the police and the political authorities always attempted to limit, control, and regulate the use of public roads. However, the panoptic powers of modern state were never as neat, efficient, and controlling as they are sometimes portrayed. Everyday people daily used and misused the streets for their own purposes to loudly sell, buy, mourn, and celebrate, often breaking a host of state regulations in the process. Street hawkers in particular frequently petitioned the state to redress their grievances, while countless other men and women adapted to all the rapid structural and technological changes by appropriating the very streets and technologies as their own. Ordinary pedestrians, beggars, commuters, paying and non-paying tram passengers, street vendors, and even pickpockets use and misuse electric tram, buses, streets, and sidewalks for their own purposes, which effectively allowed them to lay claim to the streets and adapt the very infrastructure of modernity for their own use. So there are many more historical dimensions to be discovered, I think, if we're open to considering sound as a serious path of inquiry for understanding the past. Sound historian Jonathan Stern accurately declares, and I quote, "There's always more than one map of a territory, and sound provides a particular path through history. By finding and interpreting new auditory data, historians can add new sensory dimensions to their historical analysis, transforming how we understand the past. Thank you.